Support for the Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you in part by University of Idaho, Idaho's only Carnegie R1 classified research university. Our Carnegie R1 designation recognizes the discoveries we make that help our forests thrive. It means we're creating more doctors and doing real research to strengthen cybersecurity for Idaho businesses, our energy sector, and every Idahoan. More at go.uidaho.edu/Idaho-is-Idaho.
The West is in a snow drought, mountain areas delayed opening, and limited ski runs. But nonprofit recreation area Bogus Basin has a secret weapon against the warming conditions.
I talked to the snowmakers. I was like, just start making snow up there. And we picked a spot. We called it Project X. We just made a giant pile of snow.
I'm Jamie Geary. How Bogus Basin opened with snow stored last season. Listen on BoiseStatePublicRadio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudet. This is Idaho Matters. Today, we're facing one of the planet's most urgent environmental threats. It's plastic pollution. From the air we breathe to the food on our plates, plastics, well, they're everywhere, and they leave a mark on our ecosystems, even our health, which is why journalist Erica Cirino has been on the front lines of this issue, investigating how plastics move through our world, their impact. And she's also been hunting for solutions that could make a real difference. And she's joining us live today to talk more about this. Erica, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me today.
So, Erica, you've spent a lot of time tracking plastic particles in ecosystems. What has that taught you about the hidden ways plastic impacts our lives?
So when we look at plastic items around us, we tend to think of them just as that, as items. But really, they are shedding these little particles of plastic, which we call microplastics, and then the even smaller nano-sized particles of plastic, or nanoplastics. They're shedding them at all times. And so to understand that these things are not static, these particles are constantly moving around us. They are in the oceans, they are in fresh waters, soils, indoor and outdoor air. They're in our food. They're even in outer space, and unfortunately in our bodies as well.
So talk to us about what the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is.
So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, I'll step back for a moment and say many of us have heard of it, or read about it, or heard about it described as this floating island of trash. Sometimes described as twice the size of Texas, 3 times the size of France. And we get this idea in our heads of maybe like a floating dump in the ocean. And it is not like that. If only it was like that, we could probably clean it up a lot easier. However, the reality is that it's a collection of plastic items and plastic particles and fragments of plastic stuff, spanning from the west coast of North America to Japan and the Pacific Islands. So it's really this concentrated area of plastic in the ocean, and it's occurring there because we have these oceanic gyres or vortexes that are just these naturally occurring ocean currents that is pulling in the plastic in this area. And there are several other gyres around the world, but due to the high population densities surrounding this area of ocean, we tend to see a lot of trash there, specifically plastic.
And my understanding is that you've actually been to the patch. I mean, you've seen firsthand what most people, only see in photographs, or maybe they will report about it. So I'm curious about how this maybe changed your perspective on the scale and the impact of global plastic pollution.
Sure. It was an unbelievable experience being able to sail there on a very simple ship, and then still be surrounded in the seeming middle of nowhere by all of the reminders of humanity in the form of plastics. And what really hit home was when the scientists began to dip their sampling equipment into the ocean and pull out these particles of plastic that I mentioned, the microplastics and nanoplastics. And it was at that point, I'd been covering this issue for a few years, plastic pollution. And it was at that point that I saw that we really have to dive deeper than what we commonly understand to fully grasp the scope and real impacts of this problem. So it was a very literal and figurative moment where we're going below the surface to see where this plastic is going, because the scale is extremely hard to um, articulate and wrap our heads around because it is so big. It is enormous when we think about how much plastic has been produced since the 1940s and 50s when it was first brought to the masses. So that moment, being out there, um, just only fueled my desire to understand it even more.
So, what concerns you the most about this buildup of plastic?
Most concerning is that plastic production continues at an extremely high and fast pace. Um, we're producing more than 400 million metric tons of plastic per year. We being the corporations who churn out plastics, which are related to fossil fuels because those are the key ingredients in plastic. So we have these corporations um, producing plastic stuff. And, we look all around us and see everything from our clothing to food packaging, our shoes, our building materials. I could go on and on. Most of everything in our lives today is made of plastic, at least partially made of plastic. And so to understand that we have to address this issue in a way that starts with production, I think is the key. Um, because it will only continue to get worse. And so understanding the scale and the outcome in the environment to see it's only building up fuels the urgency for action.
So, what was it like, both, and I'm thinking emotionally as well as scientifically, to actually witness the scale of plastic pollution when you were at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
Oh, it was extremely overwhelming. At that point in 2016, scientists had been observing plastic particles on the surface of oceans in the Pacific and elsewhere, um, only really heavily, I would say, in the previous decade. And so on that trip, the scientists went even further and for the first time in the Pacific looked for plastics further below the surface. And so we were looking at below the top ocean layer into the middle ocean layer and to find plastic particles, you know, way further than we expected, hit home to think about the idea that, okay, it's not just floating on the surface. It's like our entire ocean is permeated, at least in this area that we're looking at, with plastics. Um, again, indicating that this issue is much more serious and more difficult to address, right? And we can't just skim the surface and pull the plastics off or clean them up. It's like the more that is produced, the more is being emptied into our environment. And then further understanding from the oceans that the earth is not just this, um, you know, puzzle of different systems. It's not like separation between the air and the waters and the soils exists. It's all, occurring as one and all connected. And so being out there, seeing the scale, seeing the scope and the nature of the problem. Today we know that plastics basically rain down on us from the atmosphere due to, the movement of water, due to the movement of particles on our Earth and in our planet. Um, so yeah, it's just this unbelievable interconnected problem that we have, and it's very complex to address because of that reason.
So, I want to talk microplastics now because you describe them as carrying chemical hitchhikers. What kinds of chemicals are these, and how do they end up riding on plastic particles?
So, scientists really have started looking at the issue of plastic pollution from a chemical issue and a physical issue. These two different problems are definitely interrelated. And so, looking at the chemicals on plastics, it's been determined that there's more than 16,000 different chemicals that are manufactured into plastics. And I say scientists have had to look at this because often the proprietary formulas for making plastic have not been disclosed by corporations. So it is this almost reverse engineering of trying to understand what are plastics really. Like I said, we know they're made of fossil fuels, but now we also know that more than 4,000 chemicals in plastic used to make plastics are already known to be toxic to people in the environment. And that's just what's been established. There's been a lot of lack of regulation and research into many of these additive chemicals, and they include everything from phthalates, which are known to disrupt human hormones, to heavy metals, which can cause neurodevelopmental issues, and many other health issues. We have a lot of cancer-causing substances added to plastics as well. Um, you know, 16 more than 16,000 different additives. So any piece of plastic could be contaminated with a number of those. And then add on to that, when plastics are in the environment, these particles are not necessarily like smooth little beads of plastic. Sometimes that occurs because, raw plastic, before it's melted down, are these little beads called nurdles. So those are a little bit more perfect looking. But most plastic particles are very jagged, small pieces. And the nature of plastics is that they tend to absorb and leach chemicals when they are either consumed or placed in water and other organic media. So there's this so-called vector effect, or as one scientist, Dr. Sam Mason, who's now at Gannon University, put it, they act like these little poison pills. And I feel like that really sums up this microplastic issue for us.
Mm-hmm. So your reporting also shows that freshwater systems like the Great Lakes are heavily polluted. In fact, scientists found forever chemicals that were stuck to microplastics in the Great Lakes. So what makes the chemicals so dangerous, and why, as you said, they're hard to regulate, but also they're difficult to remove from water. Do we know why?
Yes, so many of the chemicals that are used to produce plastics are very persistent, we call them, because they do not readily or benignly degrade in nature. Chemicals are all around us. There are chemicals, in our everyday lives, right? But many of these synthetic manufactured chemicals that add useful qualities to plastics in particular are produced in ways that make them very long lasting, like I said, and harmful as well. PFAS are a class of thousands of different chemicals, and it's been this almost like some involved in the regulation call it whack-a-mole because they're trying to eliminate the most harmful PFAS, which are known to again interfere with human hormones and cause other health issues, as well as accumulate in the environment and produce other chemicals to replace them. But we don't want to create regrettable substitutions where the chemical replacements are just as, if not more toxic than the chemicals they're made to replace. Removing them from the environment is extremely difficult. It's also extremely expensive. It's not always possible. And so it's really important, again, to work on the preventative side here. And I'm just talking about the downstream effect. Producing chemicals and plastics is also extremely toxic upstream. So with communities and ecosystems on the front lines, there are all different types of emissions into air, soils, and waters that are extremely harmful and have serious effects on health and quality of life.
Erica, many people think of plastic pollution just as an environmental problem, but how is it connected to human health as well?
Yes, so as mentioned, our Earth's ecosystems are all connected, and human bodies are not separate from our Earth. We are, made from this planet quite literally. Um, so when we are going about our days, we are exposed to plastics in the air we breathe, the food we eat, the beverages and water we drink. It's in our soil. We are exposed through our clothing, pretty much at all times and everywhere we are exposed to plastics. And I'm not saying this to be to make folks nervous, but it's just the reality, because the more plastic that is around us, the more we are exposed. And so I want to emphasize that with the plastic particles, and also that comes along with the chemicals in plastics that they deliver into our environment and bodies, but also the effects of plastic pollution as it happens on the front lines of production, transportation, and disposal. So we have emissions from industrial facilities. There's plastic leakages from production and transportation and disposal as well. Harmful explosions and disasters from these facilities. And the list goes on and on. Everything from production facilities to incinerators, landfills, even recycling facilities of plastic pollute. So we need to address plastic pollution, not just as plastic itself, but through all of these areas of pollution. And I'll also mention quickly. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I would be remiss if I didn't add that the climate emissions from plastics are enormous. Plastics again are made from fossil fuels, so starting from the wellhead, those climate warming gases are emitted from plastics, and plastics themselves emit greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
And also, microplastic has been detected in human lungs. It's been detected in blood-related tissues. I mean, even placentas. So, Erica, what does this tell us just about how plastic is actually moving through the human body?
So we're seeing that plastics are accumulating in our organs, but also in our bloodstreams and from our blood, for example, into our lungs and our brains. It's all interconnected, as I stressed before, and scientists are trying to understand as much as they can about where and how plastics accumulate in our bodies, to understand the effects that they are having. It may be that recent increases in gastrointestinal cancers in young people might be fueled by microplastics. There's been suspicion of that, for example. And so I think, learning more about these effects is going to be critical, and scientists have stressed is really important in the coming years.
So you compare plastic particles to soot and other airborne pollutants. So what lessons can plastic researchers learn from decades of air pollution science?
Right. So as scientists are trying to really understand this issue, we can look to other fields that have studied particulate pollution, such as soot particles, because there is already this standardized method of understanding them, and quantifying and qualifying and really seeing what the effects are. And so if we can streamline and standardize plastic pollution research, which is really the goal, so we can have science that is even more useful and impactful, and certain. And science is always evolving. So I think, again, in real time, we're learning what is working and what's not when it comes to these methods. And that's what scientists are aiming for today.
And there's a lot of confusion around bioplastics and recycling. So what do people get wrong, and why does this matter?
So again, we're desperately looking for solutions because no amount of plastic in our bodies or environment really is ideal. And so things like bioplastics, which are typically either partly or fully plant-based plastic materials, they are typically made for single use. And because they are made to perform like plastics, there could be the same harmful additives, chemicals that are added to plastics in these bioplastics. They may not actually benignly degrade like they are marketed. It's something called greenwashing that we want to try to avoid. And it's a strategy of, slapping a green label on something that may seem eco-friendly or healthy. In reality, the material is much more complex. And so we have that as one issue. So just a regrettable replacement for plastic would be bioplastic. We really should be looking towards non-toxic, refillable, reusable alternatives, things like stainless steel, glass, wood, ceramic. And then we have the issue with recycling because for decades, the plastics and fossil fuel industries have pushed us to recycle plastic. They've convinced municipalities that this is the answer. Just build more recycling facilities, make curbside plastic recycling widely available. And it does seem great on the surface. Throw your used plastics into a bin and they'll be carted away somewhere else. But that really obscures the problem and the fact that very little plastic is actually recycled. So with every use, plastic degrades in quality. And so more new plastic has to be created and added to it, along with more additive chemicals to give it any performance value. So avoiding plastic from the get-go and requiring that production be cut is critical at this point. More than 10 billion metric tons of plastic have been produced since the 1940s and 50s to date, and much all of that is in the environment and landfills, and still with us today.
So, if someone wants to make a real impact on reducing plastic pollution, what strategies actually work?
I always encourage folks to start at home, start in their own communities. It is a really serious and enormous problem, but we all have to start somewhere. Individual actions do matter on the scale that you are embracing the cultural shift that we do need, and also protecting your health and your family's health the best that you can. So strive to just eliminate plastic wherever possible. So put reusable materials into your life. Try to cook more at home. Opt for natural clothing and textiles and furniture in your home. And then on a larger scale, if you're pushing for bigger change, talk to folks in your community, see how you can eliminate plastics at your local schools or houses of worship or community centers. And then go on the state level by approaching your representatives, talking to them about different bills that are on the table, such as the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that we've considered in the U.S., and just, keep pushing for those real solutions because they do exist. You can also encourage local businesses to eliminate plastic pollution and support those who are doing the right thing by producing plastic free.
And Erica, before I let you go, we should mention that you'll be talking a lot more about this topic next month with the Lifelong Learning Osher Institute. I only have about a minute left with you. What do you hope people take away from your lecture?
I hope folks see that the solutions we need, we actually have today. And it's a matter of embracing them and pushing them out there on a wider level so that they're accessible and affordable to everyone, everywhere.
Well, I want to thank you so very much for taking time to talk with us today. We've been speaking with journalist Eric Cirino about the impacts of plastic on our environment, as well as possible solutions. As I mentioned, she will be speaking February 4th at the Boise Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
Looking for another podcast to listen to? Check out The Nature of Idaho from our partner station KISU in Eastern Idaho. Join hosts Peter Pruitt and Dr. Leif Tapanilla as they share fascinating stories from the Gem State's great outdoors, celebrating Idaho's wildlife, landscape, and natural wonders. That's The Nature of Idaho from KISU. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.